Life is much simpler when you stop explaining yourself and just do what works for you. This is the Wisdom Worth Knowing podcast. I'm your host, Craig Chamberlain. If it's your first time joining me, welcome. Thanks for giving us a shot. I genuinely appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe on YouTube, Rumble, or Facebook. You can also subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Wisdom Worth Knowing is brought to you by Amazon Audible, where listening is the new reading. Get unlimited access to thousands of audiobooks completely free for 30 days. Sign up right now at audible.wisdomworthknowing.org. That's right, a free special offer for my listeners at audible.wisdomworthknowing.org. Life is much simpler when you stop explaining yourself and just do what works for you. So this quote does come with a disclaimer on my end, is that obviously taking this to an extreme is not good. We'll kind of delve into that here in a little bit. But there is a lot of truth to the quote as well. So hopefully we can find some balance as we kind of unpack it this morning. But generally speaking, we have a tendency, or many of us have a tendency, myself included, to overcomplicate a lot of aspects of our lives. And then there's this fundamental need to constantly justify why it is we do the things that we do. And I think there's a healthy aspect to this. I think in our minds we should have a general idea of why we do the things we do. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think in our heads we should understand why we do the things that we're doing, or why we invest our time and energy into the things we invest our time and energy into. But a lot of times we constantly second guess everything that we do, and we constantly question the underlying motive of a lot of the things we do. So this self-reflection and this self-questioning can become toxic if we allow it to become toxic. And it can become even more toxic if we allow it to come from an outside source, which this quote does allude to, is the stop explaining yourself. In most situations, you have to justify your behavior or your actions to others. And that's why you're trying to explain yourself. But I do want to emphasize the importance of this episode of fully understanding and grasping the complexity of our lives. Because we can greatly oversimplify the things that motivate and drive us. And other people have a tendency to greatly oversimplify our behaviors. I think as human beings, we do simplify things. We categorize things because it's honestly the only way we can live. So we tend to compartmentalize people, places, and things. The most obvious example of this is when you look at politics, you see how people tend to label. And what's funny about that is people assume the labeling is like this brainwashing thing, which, I mean, obviously some part of it is that, but labeling also is a generalization thing. No matter what end of the political spectrum you're on, the subject of politics is such a complex and human thing. Like, politics wraps up behavior, worldviews, it packs up society, it packs up cause and consequence, it packs up all of these complex societal issues that have many, 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 many layers to them. It also includes philosophy. There's just an immense amount of subjects that are wrapped up into something that's political. And this show isn't political, by the way, so I'm not going to go into my politics or anything specific. But what we do is we do categorize people because it allows us to function as humans. Because if we woke up every morning and tried to even open up or break open the complexity of something like Republican or Democrat or liberal or conservative or libertarian or socialist or communist, or like these words that have very, very complex dynamics to them, we would literally get nothing else done that day. And so what we do is we compartmentalize and we simplify things so that we can function, so that we can look at a complex issue and we can say, okay, I get the general idea of what that is. I'm going to drop that into this category. and we do it with everything. It's not just politics. We do it with the weather even. We put our faith and trust in institutions that we don't question everything. Like if we wake up and turn on the weather that morning, they'll give us the report for the week and then we'll just accept it for what it is because we'll just click it into our routine and then we'll move forward. Because we can't constantly question every aspect of our lives because we do need to function in our lives. And so the simplification is an oversimplification, but it's a justifiable oversimplification to a point. We get into trouble when we get to the explaining ourselves part because a lot of the times we just start running on autopilot because we've compartmentalized parts of our lives. And then we don't actually stop to remember that many of the aspects of our lives are a simplification or a categorization. So we make our decisions based on the weather we heard that morning or the reason we got this job or the reason we even go to work. Like we have a generalization or a simplification, simple idea of why we do the things that we do. So there's value in that, I guess is what I'm trying to say on the simplification part. There's value in having a simplistic view of why it is we do the things that we do. And we move forward not questioning that. The double-edged sword of that is that if we oversimplify things for too long and we don't stop to reevaluate our categorizations, we forget. We forget why it is we do the things that we do. And so it is important to occasionally break open those simplifications and reevaluate, to remind ourselves of that deeper sense of why it is we do the things that we do. And this could be true on the political, spiritual platform as well. Why is it that we believe what we believe? Why is it that we have accepted the politics we've accepted? Are the current state of our beliefs and the current state of our politics in line with what we originally adopted? Or have things changed? So reevaluation is a healthy thing when it's done occasionally, to kind of reestablish that foundation of the generalizations that allow us to function day in, day out. Because we do need a firm foundation to function consistently. When we haven't stopped to consider the ultimate roots of why it is we do the things that we do, then when outside forces attempt to undermine our motives, and we are forced in a position of explaining ourselves, but we can't explain it, then that means we really should stop and reevaluate. But what we don't need to do is constantly justify ourselves to other people. Because these evaluations we make and these conclusions we draw are very, very personal. And they are interwoven into our existence and our experience. And so this on-the-spot need to constantly explain to people why it is we're doing what we're doing is, first of all, none of their business in most cases, unless what we're doing affects them directly. And then second of all, it will take an immense amount of time to fully and wholly explain to people why we do what we do. And in most cases, and in many cases, we don't fully understand why we do what we do. Language is extremely limited. Being able to communicate experience on this deeper level takes a tremendous amount of effort. And articulating into words sometimes is not always easy to do. And so it's one thing to do things based on experience. It's quite another to be able to explain why you do things Explanation is something that is limited by language, by our ability to communicate. And not all of us are able to communicate effectively why it is we do the things that we do. And that's understandable, because then you have to kind of learn new words and learn to articulate and learn to discuss. And while that is a valuable skill to have, not all of us have that ability. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we can kind of refine that, though, here in a moment. But before I do, this show is brought to you by Audible. If you're like me and you love reading but don't have the time, then Audible audiobooks may be the perfect solution for you. With Audible, listening is the new reading. You can pop in your earbuds and discover that next exciting adventure, or expand your knowledge from any PC, Mac, Android, Alexa, or Apple device. And check this out, because you listen to this show, for a limited time you can get instant access to thousands of audiobooks from Audible's Premium Plus catalog completely free. Just visit audible.wisdomworthknowing.org right now and take advantage of a limited time free 30-day trial exclusive for my listeners. That's right, for 30 days you'll get full access to Audible's Premium Plus catalog, as well as an additional free title of your choosing. If you discover audiobooks aren't for you, no problem. You can cancel instantly online. That's it. It's that simple. 2 years ago, audiobooks began to change my life, and they may change yours too. Pause this podcast and head over to Audible. That's audible.wisdomworthknowing.org and sign up right now for this limited time offer for just you. So I do want to discuss a little bit something called self-authoring, which is something that's being popularized by Jordan Peterson. But it's something that a lot of us can do on our own. We don't need to sign up for his program, although if you are going through a major crossroads in your life, I do recommend going through his program. But what we can do is we can sit down and journal. That's a very similar thing, and we can write out our thoughts. And this will help us better articulate to ourselves why it is that we do what we do. And it'll also help protect ourselves and set boundaries from outside forces that constantly undermine and erode our motives and constantly question us. And then when people do question us and our motives, we can remind ourselves of what this quote does say, is we don't have to explain or justify ourselves to others, but we do need to do it to ourselves. We do need to justify to ourselves why it is that we do what we do. And the reason we need to do this is because life is going to get difficult. And there are going to be storms in our life. And those storms are going to pull the rug out from under us, and they're going to throw us into a spiraling chaos. And it's at those moments in which an understanding of why we're doing what we're doing becomes the most important. Because we do need to, in those moments, kind of put the pieces back together. Whether we lose a job or a career, we get sick, we have a family member who gets sick, somebody passes away, our company shuts down, we get a huge medical or financial bill or setback. There's hundreds of life things outside of our control that can happen to us that cause our lives to spiral into chaos. And in a lot of ways, those are the best times to sit down and then remind ourselves, because they crack open our simplifications and generalizations. But it's a good opportunity to sit down and remind ourselves why it is we do the things that we do. We can at least explain and justify ourselves to ourselves. These are probably the biggest moments in which we discover what is most important to us and for us. And I think this is why it's also important to have our lives built on a firm foundation or a firm rock. If you are a religious person, Christianity, this is why Christ used this type of language when he explained that he was the foundation and he was the rock, and he would talk of himself as if he were the cornerstone. And that's because there are deep, deep truths that are worth building our lives on. And even if you're not religious, this is true. There are deeper, more constant things that exist in the world. And if you want to go completely not religious on it, we could call them natural laws. And it's something that's been discussed for hundreds of years, if not thousands. There are natural laws to the world that we can discover and build our lives on. Obviously, my experience building my life on Christ was one of the best decisions. His teaching specifically, not the church, which church has value, so I don't want to devalue that, but building my life on his teachings in particular have allowed for many things to happen to me in my life that haven't completely destroyed my worldview. Because we can invest ourselves wholly in our jobs, in our careers, or in our marriage and relationships, or in our families, or in our health. And these things seem logical because they've always been there for us. They've always been constant. But at a moment's notice, these things can be destroyed and taken from us. And it's a terrifying prospect to consider, but it happens to people every single day. And that's why it is important to have a foundation that underlies all of those things, these more eternal foundations. And like I said, even if you're not religious, I hope that you can find value in that, is that hopefully you can at least dig underneath the things that kind of are the foundation of your life and hopefully find something that is deeper than something as superficial as just a career or just a relationship. Because what's going to happen is as things threaten those, which things will threaten those, it will force you to spiral uncontrollably into questioning your entire worldview. If you're too emotionally invested in them. But one thing you never have to do is what this quote discusses and alludes to, is you never have to fully explain or justify yourself to other people. You can do what works for you. Because this is a very personal and emotional and experiential and it's a lot of things that in a lot of ways aren't even explainable to others. One could say if you can explain it well to others, at least you have a good understanding of it yourself, but you don't have to explain it to others. You don't need to justify yourself to other people. And if you're in relationships in which they demand a justification for everything that you do, that's not necessarily the healthiest of relationships, and it may be appropriate to set a boundary there. And tell them, listen, I've thought about the things that I do. I take what I do very seriously. What you have to say, I'll take into consideration, but I don't need to justify myself to you, or my motives, or why it is that I do what I do. These are my decisions, and at my moment in my life, I feel like they're the best decisions. Now, like I said at the beginning of this episode, if you dig your heels in too deep and you do not ever question or reevaluate your motives, that's not good either. So we do need to allow for some feedback externally so that we can reevaluate, because we can't be arrogant enough to believe that everything we believe is the absolute truth. Our simplifications or generalizations are the absolute truth. We do need to allow for outside information to come in, and it should at some point reconcile, right? If our worldviews are correct or mostly correct, as things challenge those worldviews, they should reconcile with them at some point. And if there's something you're wrestling with because it's calling into question your worldview, whether this be on a political level, on a religious level, or whatever it might be, then it's important to sit down and kind of reevaluate so that you can get back to that generalization, but with more of a firmer foundation on that. And then over time, the outside questioning and the outside forces that destabilize you will start to seem less like threats and more like opportunities, because they become opportunities for us to kind of firmly establish that foundation or reinforce that foundation that allows us to function day in, day out. And then we become stronger. We see the world from a firmer, healthier perspective, hopefully, that is on solid ground. Now, this can become very, very, very difficult if we have embraced a lie for an extended period of time and we've attempted to kind of adopt new lies in order to reinforce the old lies. A perfect example of this, an obvious example, would be something like the lie of addiction, where we make a drug the cornerstone of our existence, and then we use all of our positive, intoxicated experiences to reinforce that foundation. And then life starts to happen, the consequences of having an addiction start to happen. And we don't allow those things to really kind of break up that fake foundation we've established. This can be a very difficult process. Like when we've dug our heels in too deep on a lie, the best thing we can do is just destroy that foundation. Like if we've made a discovery that something is a lie, oh wow, this brought a visualization into my head too that might be beneficial. If we basically discover that we built our lives on a lie, let's say the lie is addiction, then we need to get to work. The fastest way forward is to get to work on destroying that foundation, but that's not something that can be destroyed overnight because we've accepted so many lies that think of it as like cement, like a cement foundation. Like, first of all, you need the right tools to break it apart. So that might mean like soaking ourselves in the truth so that we can actually go in and start breaking apart all the lies that we've woven together or that fused together into the concrete, and getting new tools that will just blow it up. But the quickest way forward is to break up. And that's an extremely painful process. I mean, there's things I've discovered in my life that were lies, and they still are lies, and I'm still actively trying to break up those lies. Because the longer you commit to a lie, the harder it is to break it down and replace it with the truth. And there's a lot of motivated people on a political and existential who take advantage of this. They literally will force people to reinforce lies over and over and over again, because they know the more you emotionally invest in the lie, the harder it is to separate yourself from it. The harder it is to break it down. And unfortunately, on a political level, this exploitation occurs on all ends of the political spectrum. And that's why we as individuals need to protect ourselves. And then we'll have certain friends who reinforce the lies in our lives. And addiction, another perfect example of that is we've surrounded ourselves who co-sign our addictive personalities, and they say things like, oh, it doesn't matter, oh, that was just a one-time thing, oh, like they reinforce the lie. And so those people can make it more difficult to break up the lies, because they can try to reinforce the lie while you're trying to break it up, and then you're breaking up the cement, and then you're repatching the cement, and you're breaking it up and repatching it, and you can get an endless loop on that. This is the Wisdom Worth Knowing podcast. I'm your host, Craig Chamberlain. Thank you for stopping by to listen to this episode. I appreciate you taking the chance. This show is brought to you by Amazon Audible, where listening is the new reading. Before you go, make sure to pause this podcast and head over to get the special deal of unlimited access to thousands of audiobooks completely free for 30 days. You can sign up right now at audible.wisdomworthknowing.org. That's audible.wisdomworthknowing.org to take advantage of this limited time offer just for you. You can subscribe to the podcast on Facebook, Rumble, and YouTube. Don't forget to like and share. They help the show grow. It helps feed the algorithms, I like to say. You can also subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. If for some reason my show is not on a network that you prefer, please let me know so that I can get it added to there. And until next time, remember, life is much simpler when you stop explaining yourself and just do what works for you. So until next time, let's work on being the best version of ourselves that we can today, because that's all we can do. Have a good day.